Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary Reeston. Hannah is the tech support for today. Today's webinar is about delivering Solihull approach training via Zoom. And we have a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. So you will notice that you were all muted on arrival, and that does seem to be the general approach to these types of digital platforms. We will be using the chat feature today to communicate, and Hannah will be monitoring that throughout the presentation and afterwards. The other thing is that once we've once I finish the presentation, I will be meeting with Hannah to coordinate the collate the chat messages. But if there is time at the end, we will open it up to some verbal communication. It just depends on how things go. So I know that, like us, things are changing, and lots of you will have had to find different ways of working, and digital platforms is one of them. I have to say at this point, I'm not an expert. But I have been able to gather knowledge about Zoom and how we can use it to deliver Solihull approach training. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to share that with you today. What we've got planned for today is a PowerPoint presentation. Then we'll invite you to put messages in the chat. After that, there'll be a very short look away where Hannah and I will move into a breakout room just to collate the questions and see if there's any themes. And it'll also give you a couple of minutes to have a look away. I'll respond to the chat via the video. And then, as I said, if there is time, we'll open it up to some verbal communication. We have also in your email that you've been sent set up a SurveyMonkey evaluation, because we really would appreciate any feedback from today's webinar. This is the 4th webinar, and we have built on from the first one. We've fed information into the next one and then subsequent ones. So what you've got today is the accumulation of 4 webinars. This is the chat feature that I was talking about. Now, most of you will probably be familiar with it, but just in case it's helpful to anybody, the chat feature is located on the navigation bar that if you hover over your screen, it appears. And then there's an icon called chat. A panel will appear on the right-hand side, and at the bottom, there will be a text box that you can type a message into. So feel free to do that. So when we started thinking about Zoom training, we started to ask people about what were their concerns about it. And these were the key things that came up. People did have some worries, but it was mostly about security. And I know that for some organisations, patient contact using Zoom does not meet their encryption and levels of security. However, other organisations are okay to deliver training, and some organisations where they won't allow it for client contact, people can complete a permissions form and then they are allowed to use it for things like training or some other types of meeting. People have been concerned about disruptions to the Wi-Fi. The fidelity of the programme is something that comes up, particularly about how many people you can train at one time, and also communication. Managing the facilitation is also something that's come up, and disruptions to training, and also just managing the Zoom features. That's something else that's come up. So when we started to think about delivering the Solihull approach via a digital platform, of course, because we're Solihull approach, we started to think about how it might feel for the trainers. And initially, when we asked, the trainers expressed some anxiety, some stress and worry about delivering in this way. And they said it could feel a bit overwhelming. On the positive side, Zoom training and using other platforms, because we're not suggesting that Zoom is the only platform. A lot of organisations do use Microsoft Teams, and that does have some similar features. But we just started with Zoom, and it is designed for familiarity, and it definitely is easy to use. Tech support, training needs and general support does seem to vary depending on individual situations. And what we're hoping is that if we're using the Solihull approach and there is a containing experience, the trainer will be more aligned to the image in the green circle rather than in the red one. One of the things that people have found really helpful is setting up some criteria for how you arrange a meeting. So for instance, having an agreed criteria that there'll be a password, maybe a waiting room, which you've experienced today. You can lock a meeting, you can record if applicable. And by having this criteria, it does reduce people's worries about the security. It's also helpful to build in time to practice the Zoom. I know that might seem obvious, but making sure that you give yourself that time. And some people have made adaptations to the facilitation or the PowerPoint presentation. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Having somebody to help you set up on the day of training until you're confident is definitely helpful. Now that could be your co-trainer, or you could have a colleague join you for part or all of the training. What that person could do is help you check your audio and your video. The location of your camera seems to be the most common question that people have, where the light source is, and people have found out by experience that you really need it either above you or in front of you, and not a window or a light source behind you, because it does make your face appear quite dark then. And that might seem obvious, but when you're having to deal with a lot of things, it's helpful to have somebody else just to view you from the delegate's point of view. And then your PowerPoint, for some people, it is helpful to add slides. They can put links in there or prompts for breaks and activities. But I would say this just depends on your individual preference. And of course, as with all training, you'd be thinking about building in time for preparation and support, building in time for setup and close down. People who are using the digital platform have said about half an hour at the beginning and the end seems to be about right. And of course, processing time afterwards. Being reflective in the training and after seems to be even more important and relevant for the trainer. We all know that it's a really emotional experience being a trainer, and that's without entering the digital world. So it's remembering to give yourself that processing time. This slide is an example of the security measures. So I mentioned the password, but there's also, each meeting has a personal meeting ID. Now, if you do put the password as a requirement, and then a link is created, and if you send that link out to your delegates, the password will be embedded within the click. So they just have one within the URL. So they just have a one-click access. So that's what that sort of looks like. There are other security measures, and these include creating the waiting room, requiring the host to be available, present before the meeting starts, lock a meeting. As the trainer, you will be designated as the host, and that will give you more features, more things like breakout rooms. You can lock the meeting, you can record. You can also have a co-host. Now, the co-host will have the majority of the features that you have, such as sharing the screen, managing the chat, muting, unmuting, locking a meeting, renaming participants. But they can start and pause recordings, but what they can't do is arrange breakout rooms or set up a recording. So you would still need, if you have a co-trainer, to switch the host status between you depending on which activity you're organising. The Zoom website has lots and lots of tutorials and pages about each of their features. So you can see there's a link below, and they're very informative and really easy to follow. The other thing that people have asked a lot about is the Wi-Fi, audio and video. You could ask the delegates to check their Wi-Fi. What we found is that most people know what their Wi-Fi status is, but you can still ask them to check it when you send out the information about the training. Some organisations do block some programs. So one of the things that we found is that people sometimes can't access Dropbox and of course Zoom, but you might need to speak to your IT department and get admin rights to gain access. And as I said, Zoom is just one of those platforms that you can use. The most common other one is Microsoft Teams. I think the main difference that I've noticed is that you can view more people on Zoom. With currently Microsoft Teams, I think has about 9 people that you can see, although I think they are continually trying to upgrade that. Whereas with Zoom, you can see a considerable number on screen. When we're thinking about the trainer and the issues that might arise, it's sometimes helpful to have a checklist just for the trainer. Some of the basic questions: is your audio and video turned on when they're talking to the delegates? Can you check your Wi-Fi status? Can you leave the meeting and rejoin? Or sometimes just restarting your computer can be the answer to all your problems. You could also have an alternative person that the delegate can contact if the issues aren't sort of straightforward and quickly resolved. And that can then leave the trainer free to focus on the training. Now this screen, it's when you share your screen. This slide is when you share your screen. And the very helpful box in the bottom left-hand corner is a share computer sound. When I first started, I hadn't quite become aware of this, and so when I was sharing a video, some people said it worked well and some people said I can't really hear it. But when we click this button, because you're sharing your computer sound, it eradicates sort of 99% of the problems. Occasionally somebody will still say there is an issue, and then it's been resolved mostly by you as the trainer increasing the sound on your computer, and that volume seems to sort it out. So when we were starting to think about the Solihull approach, we also thought about the delegates, and of course we were holding them in mind as well, right from the beginning, starting to try and provide a containing experience. So we redesigned the email that we send out to delegates about the training, so that it, in addition to including the Zoom link, it also told them, asked them, could you check your Wi-Fi? And we also told them what would happen if the Wi-Fi was disrupted. We also gave them some information about the security, so that reduced their anxiety. We've also included a little bit about how activities will run, briefly saying that that Zoom has breakout rooms. Of course, if you were using another platform, you might describe the feature that that platform has. We said that sometimes activities will be led by trainers, that there's a whiteboard feature, and you could even have a pen and paper, but that the trainer will guide you through that. We also included a small amount about how videos would be viewed. So we've found the least problems with sharing your screen. So the video is set up on the trainer's computer and then they share their screen. Occasionally you do need to share links with your delegates, and then they can access them via their own computer. In relation to handouts, we're now doing electronic ones, so there is a disc in everybody's pack. If you're able to put those onto the computer, you can email them out. You can either put a password on or just send them to the designated delegates. Some of the new manuals do have the handouts on a web page with an electronic password. So we asked delegates what were they mainly concerned about, and the main things that came up repeatedly was that they were worried about looking at the screen for a long time, that some of them said they would get a headache if that happened. They were also worried about not being able to concentrate for the whole day, and there were also concerns around home working, childcare and sharing the space with the family. So what we've done is that at the beginning of the day, we've let delegates know that we're going to break the day up, that we're going to add in comfort breaks. Now, the average has been about having a comfort break for about 1 minute or even 2 minutes every 20 to 30 minutes. Although I think that what the experienced trainers are finding is that they're negotiating this with the delegates. So we had one training where the delegates wanted a break every 20 minutes. And then we had another training where they were quite happy to do it every 45 minutes. But it does give everybody an opportunity to think about back care, staying hydrated, standing up, walking about, getting a drink, and of course eye care, so you can look away from the screen. But what we've found as well is really helpful is that during breaks, people should stay connected. You have less problems if you do this. So they can still mute themselves and they can disable their camera. But if they leave the meeting, you may find that if you've locked it, they might not be able to get back in again. The other thing that's helpful is just to acknowledge that there may well be ruptures and have an agreed plan. So, for instance, if the delegate needs to take a phone call or deal with an issue, you can have an agreement as to how the trainer will re-engage with the delegates. And the trainers, from our experience, have just used their judgment as to how to deal with each situation, and that has been very productive. One of the other things that people have been concerned about is the fidelity to the programme. We've been really encouraged that the training manuals do include the Solihull approach both in the content and the process. And as with face-to-face courses, the parallel process for support is equally as important. We found that the content hasn't been changed. What's happened is there's been some adjustments to the facilitation and using the Zoom features or whatever features are available on another digital platform. But the sequence of the programme hasn't been changed, and neither has the content. The trainers have said that the experiential nature of the training still can be experienced. And we think that in addition to adapting the facilitation, there are no consecutive days in our training, so it does give people a look away. And also with those added breaks, that does make for a better sort of digital experience, really. So while there was some concerns initially about cutting the training into smaller sections, we haven't actually done that, although, you know, we wouldn't rule it out if it was, the feedback was that it was really required. The one part of the training that we have put something else in for was the observational component of the homework, and that was because of the current situation that we were in with the lockdown. So because people were less likely to be able to observe a parent-child interaction, we're piloting 2 video clips from the Social Toddler, a before and after clip, from an intervention. And initially, the feedback from that is really positive, because you can see the steps in the dance of the reciprocity and the interaction. So we'll keep you informed about how that moves forward. The theory to practice component of the homework, initially there were some concerns about whether people would be able to do that because they were not necessarily working with families. But I think that's sort of changing, because our experience is that most people are having some contact with families. And from the evaluations of the trainings that we've currently run, the feedback is that it is highly relevant to their work. So they are using it in their interventions with families. The other thing that we've been asked is, what sort of trainings can you run? We've started with the 2-day and the train the trainer, although we've extended into some other 1-day trainings, and we're about to embark on the parenting. I'm just having a look at what sort of adaptations we might need. And again, it won't be changing the content, it will just be managing the facilitation. But I think because of the knowledge we've got now and the confidence of trainers delivering it, we're more of the mind that actually you can run pretty much any of the trainings. The other thing that people were asking about was how many people should attend a training, because initially they thought that maybe 12 would be too many. We're gathering information all the time, and at the moment there is still a feeling that you can give an experiential training for about 8 to 12 people, just as you do for the face-to-face. But I think that would be determined by who you're training, the experience of the trainers, and just your general sort of impression of how things are running. One of the impressive things and noticeable things that I've seen is that the trainer's confidence has actually accelerated considerably after just 1 or 2 trainings. And I think that's because, although there is some learning in terms of using the digital platform, the skill set that trainers have is sort of at their core. And so once they've got to sort of their heads around the Zoom features, they're able to still offer the facilitation in the way they would during a face-to-face training. So again, we're thinking about communication. It's worth noting that disruptions will occur because of the digital platform, but actually people have responded remarkably well. And there has been some definite learning. There seems to be an agreed protocol that when everybody arrives, everybody's muted. That screens out background noise. The trainer can outline the proposals for the communication with the delegates at the beginning of the day. And as I say, because they are assigned as the host, they will have more features available to them to manage this. And if there are 2 trainers, you can switch the host feature between you so that you've got access to all the features. Because everybody is muted, one of the most common features that people use is the raised hand feature. And I'm talking electronically, although you can raise your hand physically as well. So what the trainers have been doing is they've been acknowledging the delegate with the raised hand, and then they've either been unmuting them or asking the delegate to unmute themselves. And they can either do that by the features, or you can just press the space bar. There are a few other features that you can use in the chat, and you can see there you can say, I want, ready for a drink, go faster, go slower, need a toilet break, that type of thing. So the next thing we were thinking about were the PowerPoint presentations and videos. So the PowerPoints and the videos, as I was saying, they're shared through the share screen feature. And as I say, it's very easy to use. One of the top tips I would have on my list was that make sure that you've got everything else closed down, in case, just to make sure you don't share any of your confidential material with somebody, or something that you didn't want them to didn't want included in the day. Now, what I'm going to do now is just click on this link so that I can show you one of the tutorials that the Zoom website has, and how easy it is to navigate between the two.
In this video, you'll learn how to share content within a Zoom meeting. Simply select Share Screen at the bottom of your meeting window to get started. From here, you'll be given various options for sharing, such as sharing your full desktop or an individual application you have open on your computer. You can also access advanced sharing options and the ability to share an individual file from a specific location as well. If you're planning to share content that contains audio, such as a third-party video, be sure to select Share Computer Sound in the bottom left-hand corner to ensure that your participants can hear your computer sound as you're sharing. When you're ready, select Share on the right-hand side. Once content sharing begins, you can always stop the share to stop sharing content with others at any time. If you need to pause the share to take a momentary break or prepare other materials, this is an option as well. Or if you'd like to share a new piece of content, you can simply select New Share and select another piece of content for a seamless transition.
So you can see they've got tutorials for everything, and you can just see which options fit with the type of training that you're planning to.
Hi everyone, this is Farah from Zoom, and
so
we are back.
So that shows how quickly you can deal with a glitch. So I'd forgotten to take out the tab. So the other thing is about the managing the facilitation. There's a range of activities and teaching approaches, and one of them is the group discussions. Feedback is that group discussions vary on the digital platform just as they vary in the classroom. Some groups are chatty, some are quiet, and all the usual facilitation skills still apply. With Zoom, we have found that there's a few factors that you might need to pay some more attention to. So in the ordinary process of communication and turn taking, in ordinary circumstances, it takes around about 2 to 4 seconds, but this will be different and longer in the Zoom environment. And there will be a change to the rhythm of how you communicate. And being able to tolerate the silent space seems to be more relevant. But what we found is that the trainer and their skill in gathering all the information and how to manage it is the key to the flow of how the training goes. Trainers are still saying they're able to pick up the non-verbal communications, but that what they are doing is checking in a little bit more, asking how the session is going. Trainers said that at first it was tiring, but actually the more that they're doing the training, the easier it gets. And one trainer said it was quite exciting. So I think it can just depend on the individual trainer. For the videos, what we found is that if there are very short videos, the transition between the trainer delivering something and the video doesn't seem to have any impact. However, for the longer videos, they have noticed that the initiations part of the dance does take a little bit more effort. So I think when we were thinking about this, we aligned it with in the classroom, you would turn the lights on, you would trainer would return to the front of the room. But with the digital platform, you may have to sort of warm the group up again. You might have to save the video is now finished, and you might have to say, is everybody ready to move on? But with the skill of the trainer, we have found that the transition is still possible to make it smooth. And of course, during videos, delegates and trainers can still use the chat feature, and they can also speak. So the trainer could actually speak to the delegates as well. I'm moving on now to group activities, and I mentioned earlier something called breakout rooms, and many of you may be familiar with these. They allow you to split delegates into different virtual rooms. You can have multiple rooms. In fact, the Zoom feature, you could have up to 50 rooms with 200 participants, not that you're planning to train that many. But you can assign the delegates either automatically or you can assign them manually. You can reassign delegates, and you can move yourself into one room or another room. You can also broadcast a message to all. So for instance, if you're wanting to say that the session was about to finish within a minute, you can send that to them. And as I said before, there are tutorials on the Zoom website for all of these. This screen is just showing you some of the steps that you would take. Because I haven't got two computers at the moment, I'm not able to show you the actual clicking of how I would do this. So I've put a slide with that on. On the left, you've got the create the breakout room. So when you were going through this process, you would first create the number of rooms, and then you would assign the delegates to which room you thought that you wanted them to go in. It's a really quick process. You can do it before, but you can also just do it in the moment, and it really doesn't take very long at all. This screen is just showing you some of the steps that you would take. Because I haven't got two computers at the moment, I'm not able to show you the actual clicking of how I would do this. So I've put a slide with that on. The first, on the left, you've got the create the breakout room. So when you were going through this process, you would first create the number of rooms, and then you would assign the delegates to which room you thought that you wanted them to go in. It's a really quick process. You can do it before, but you can also just do it in the moment, and it really doesn't take very long at all. One of the other questions that we've had is, how do you deal with delegates' emotions? Because we know that there are instances in the discussion where participants, by thinking about their own childhood or their children, they can at times become overwhelmed. It's not a frequent occurrence, but it does happen. In the face-to-face trainings, you would be able to think about this at the beginning of the training and explain it to the trainers. You can do that exactly the same way on the digital platform. You can tell people that if anybody wants to speak to the trainer, that they can do so. Then the trainers, as in the face-to-face training, they would decide how to handle the situation in order to both support the person and to minimise the disruption to the group. So what you would find in the digital experience, you have the facility of the breakout rooms, or you can allocate some time or invite the person to stay at the end of the Zoom meeting. So that's in the close down time frame. And those are the types of things that the trainers have been using, and they found them to be as effective as in the classroom. One of the other things I mentioned earlier was something called the whiteboard. It's shared through the share screen. It's got annotation tools that can appear automatically. Delegates really like this because I think it gives them a sense of participation. You could use flip chart paper and pen as well, but they do sort of like this as an alternative. The other thing you can do is that you can set one up in the breakout rooms. Now, what they would need to do if they did this is they would need, one of the delegates would need to save it in the breakout room, and then you would share your screen when you've joined the main session. So ordinarily, the trainer is the only person that can share their screen, but there is a function that you can allow participants to do that as well. So the host would enable would enable the participants to share their screen, and that would allow everybody to see this. But it is one of the features that people particularly like. So the other thing is resources and evaluations. There are paper and e-versions of the manuals and the books. The session that's included about getting to know the resource pack, again, depending on your personal circumstances, you may find that some authorities, where there's home working, people haven't got access to them. So some of those facilitators have been showing the delegates the manual, and then people can revisit them once they've got access. But there is also e-versions if you've used those in your authority. Handouts, again, I mentioned that you can send them via email with a password, or we do have some protected web-based handouts that are available with some of the newer manuals. And again, the videos, you would be able to share that through your computer if you've got a disk facility, or I have found some available on YouTube, and I've included those in the information sheet that you'll be receiving after the training. For the evaluations, what we've used is SurveyMonkey. You may not have that facility, and otherwise people have been emailing the document. For the best uptake of evaluations, it's better to ask people to do it at the end of the session. So before they leave the Zoom session, ask them to complete it, just like you would in the classroom. Otherwise, as we all know with questionnaires, it's hard to allocate time, and the uptake rate drops dramatically. So that's the end of the presentation, and we'd like to invite you to put any questions you might have in the chat facility. We'll give you a few minutes to do that, and then Hannah and I will just go to a breakout room so that we can collate them and theme them, and we'll come back and have a chat with you and let you know what we've found in the chat facility. And you can just stand up and stretch or move away while we're away. Hi everybody. So I'm just going to open up the chat in case there was any other. Yeah, so we've got a couple of themes that you've asked questions about. One of them was the raised hand. You can access it if you hover over and find your participant icon. And if you click on that, you'll then see on the right-hand side, there'll be a selection of sort of reactions. Somebody asked about recording trainings. With trainings, we've never recorded a training, mainly because you can't be sure if there's any confidential information in there and where it will be shared. So we never if the question was about the standard 2-day foundation training or things like that, we never record those trainings. If somebody did record a training, however, it usually is recorded on your local computer. So there's a your local computer will have a folder, and it's automatically saved in there, and then you can choose to convert it into something that you can watch then. But in relation to the trainings, we never record the trainings. Obviously, if you did record the trainings, you'd have to get permission from the people that are involved in it. So the sound, I know that Hannah was saying that there was a question about the sound, and the response was that you need to update your Zoom. Is that correct, Hannah?
Yes, so previously some delegates have had issues with sound, and most of the time if they update the version of Zoom they have, they can normally just get back on and the sound is fine. So we always advise to just double check what version of Zoom you're on and just update it.
There was another question about activities, and we've found that all the activities have been run as per the pack. Oh, thank you. Great. I can see a thumbs up. So, yes, they've just run the activities using the breakout rooms, and that seems to have worked very well. No problems with that.
One more question that's just come through. What have trainers found useful as icebreakers for the beginning of the day and setting the tone?
Yeah, again, they've used a variety. They haven't strayed very far from the ordinary ones. What's your favourite smell? Things like that. They continue to use the same sorts of icebreakers that they would have done ordinarily. So again, there hasn't been that many changes to the actual content of the training. It's been more to do with paying a bit more attention to bringing people back. If you've got a particularly quiet group, just using those facilitation skills about trying to engage everybody, just noting if there are a few people that are quieter and checking in with them in a sensitive way. The feedback was from one person that because they weren't very verbal, they didn't tend to talk, and so then they just gave up. But because they told the trainer, she was able to accommodate that. But generally, things haven't really been that different in the training. It's been mainly the facilitation. And people are very, very keen to engage, which is, very encouraging. Everybody wants it to work, and I think that makes a big difference. Thank you for attending today, and I'm glad that it's been helpful. So yes, it doesn't seem to be anything else. Okay, so shall we say goodbye and come back to us if you have got any other questions? You've got our contact details. Yeah, and just come back to us. We'd be really pleased to help.